Hi, my name is Winslet, and welcome to my video going over my 10 general tips for playing around with the new content that we are getting in the Primal Fury expansion and the free Wolf update for Age of Wonders 4, both of which are coming out on February 27th. Big thank you to Paradox Interactive and Triumph Studios for sending me a free press key for Age of Wonders 4 Primal Fury and for including me in the early coverage of this expansion. I have been working a lot on this video and I'm very excited to share my insights with you. The first 3 tips will focus on more general tips, whereas the last 7 tips will each focus on a primal animal and a couple of synergies and build ideas that I've had while playing around with each of them. There are over 25 pages of patch notes for the wolf update, so I'm sure I'm missing some strong combinations. If you find any strong ones that you'd like to share, please feel free to do so in the comment section below. Oh, and I will have timestamps in the description that you can use to jump between any of the particular tips. If you start a game on the default settings with Devotees of Good and Powerful Evokers, then you're going to start off with a stack that looks like this, where you get 3 Animists. Each will have the ability to summon in a Primal Crow as well as Spiritual Healing. Spiritual Healing gives them 3 stacks of Rising Fury, which makes it easier to summon in the Crow. The Crow requires a 1 stack of Fury of the Storm Crow, which means they need 5 stacks of Rising Fury to summon in a Crow, but there's no cooldown on this, so it can just be used continuously. And if you have 3 Animists, they can just spawn one in at the very beginning of a match, and or try and make it so they each spawn in a crow after using the heal and making a single attack. Because I think a single attack gives them the other 2 stacks of Rising Fury that they need in order to get to the Fury of the Storm Crow bonus, and in order to basically take advantage of this whole summon Primal Crow interaction. There is a spell that's quite good that I expect to get nerfed at one point. The Conjure Primal Crow is relatively cheap for what it does. It gives you another unit on the battle that's quite good. It gives you one of these tier 2 mythicals. It's 30 mana, 25 casting points. And I think that if you can get that animal on the battlefield through Animists, you're saving yourself a lot of potential mana. So let's actually take a look at what this looks like in combat. So as I mentioned earlier, one option you have with the Animists is you can just say, hey, I'm going to put all of my healing on one of these guys. I'm not going to get any healing out of it, and I'm just going to summon in a crow because they're very good. And if my units don't take damage, that means they're going to be able to clear other fights more easily, more quickly. Now, what I just did there was wasting a stack of Rising Fury from a spiritual healing, but I bet if you had just 6 Animus that it would make sense to do that at the beginning of every fight, because then you just get to do this a little bit earlier. And these units are generally very, very good. Just a little sneak preview of what I'm going to talk about when I get to the um, the crow. He has a pretty cool attack that actually does an AoE. So yeah, look forward to that discussion. We'll get to that shortly. If we play this fight differently, we can actually make it so that we get multiple primal crows on the map at the same time. These guys started off by trying to hit the units. They got 1 attack in, and then they took some damage, healed each other, and a turn after that, they were able to summon in these guys, which I think is a pretty efficient return on actions. I think that uh, using 6 actions to spawn in 2 units who are around for 3 turns, it will give you more actions, but it is an investment of time and energy to get to this point, and these guys do disappear after 3 turns. So you do want to keep that in mind when you're making those considerations. And another thing I was thinking about when you do this type of strategy is this guy deals the same type of damage as the Animist. The Animist's damage type depends on the spirit animal. So if you are the Serpent, I think you do physical damage. If you guys worship the Serpent, they do physical damage on their Animists as well as on their primal animal, and that means that you can be countered through things like the Storm Spirit, who has a lot of lightning resistance. They would be pretty good against players who are heavily relying on the Animist strategy, um, on the on the eagle, not the eagle crow, on the primal crow start. The summons do disappear after 3 turns at the end of your turn, which is a pretty important consideration for trying to block an enemy revive. Sometimes if you stand on a location, a enemy can't revive there, but if a summon disappears right before a unit revives, they get that revive even though you might think you're blocking off the spot. And it can also like make it so that units that were engaged, like this battle mage, all of a sudden gets 3 attacks instead of having to take a retaliation. I've done that before with summons, and I saw it happen multiple times through the dev streams recently. I think there's more ways to summon in things, so it makes sense that people are missing that timer more often. I would argue that you would want to take a little bit of damage on your support unit so that they can use the healing automatically at the beginning of combat in auto combat, and that you probably would want to avoid bringing in things like the darter and the protector because while they can benefit from the Rising Fury, I think the Rising Fury is best on these Animists so that they can summon in units. I think that has to be the best benefit of the Rising Fury effect. Of course, you can get the extra lightning damage and the damage going to adjacent enemies on these units. That's very good. Being able to do a lot of extra damage is very good because it can mean that you'll take out enemies faster. I just think getting more actions from bringing units is better than even killing off an enemy and taking actions away from them. It depends on the unit a little bit. Check out the new Druidic Terraformers Society trait. One of the more interesting aspects of Druidic Terraformers is that they can be combined with the adaptation traits that let you terraform the land around you, and it'll be cheaper to do so, and you'll get more of a benefit out of them. If we go back to the societies, we'll see that Primal cannot be combined with Desolate Adaptation, whereas, yeah, the Druidic Terraformers is more about that type of thing, but you can use Druidic Terraformers with Primal. If that's the way you'd rather take that society trait, you can kind of take it in 2 different directions. The neat thing about this with the adaptations is it makes the swamp, desolate, desert, and Arctic adaptations a lot more viable. The underground adaptation was one of the ones that people were using because it gave you excavation for free, is basically giving you 100 Imperium for a society trait pick, which is pretty valuable. It's I think a lot better than most of the things in your list of options here. I do think it is worth noting that the Shadow Affinity has what I consider to be the best terraforming spell in the game. This will make terrain Arctic, but what's really nice on top of it is the -5 status resistance for one world map turn that can be applied to multiple stacks if they're in the same province, and that can make it a lot easier to either like freeze, stun, guild, Insanity a unit or Berserk an enemy unit. This is generally very, very valuable, and for that reason, it's the only terraforming spell that I'm familiar with. It is also worth noting that the Tome of Cryomancy has one of my favorite buildings for adjacency that just works really well for terraforming. If you wanted to terraform things into Arctic around your School of Cryomancy locations, then you're going to be able to get a lot more mana out of them. If we look at this save file, then we can see basically how the School of Cryomancy works in action. If I click right here, or if I hover over this, I'll see 3 green lines, one going into my territory and 2 going outside of my territory, which makes it pretty easy to get the adjacency going if you start in the Arctic terrain or if you're able to turn things into the Arctic terrain. Another interesting thing that one can note about this build is basically how the economy bonuses will work out with different terrain types. For example, this outpost right here is going to be a really good city because it has 3 of the terrain types that give economic bonuses. Grassland gives food, I think forest gives production, and I believe snow gives mana. So I'll be able to get 3 multipliers on this city. Whereas if I compare it to this city, it only has 2 things, 2 terrain types on the core, the city core, which means when it becomes a city, it's only going to get the production bonus and the mana bonus. But that's probably a little bit more realistic. It's going to be hard to get 3 bonuses on all of your cities or very many of your cities. You may only be able to do that on one city, or it may be almost impossible to do that on any of your cities, depending on the way the world generates. Now, one interesting thing about this particular province is that it gives you mana in this location right here. So you're going to be able to take advantage of that multiplier from snow pretty quickly. Whereas if I come down here and I look at this one, it does not get a benefit from snow, but it does have the food modifier and the production modifier, or the train that gives those modifiers um, right here. And it also has the food location right there in the city center. As I mentioned earlier, this city is going to be able to get 3 out of the 4 economic bonuses from Druidic Terraformers. If I hover over here, we can see that I'm getting +6 food from Druidic Terraformers, and I'm getting plus 5 production from that thing, and I think just +1 mana from the Druidic Terraformers. And what I found really interesting about this is it's kind of hard to see those multipliers anywhere else than if you have the income and you hover over the multipliers. I don't see it anywhere in the information about the city. And then another thing that I noticed about this that was pretty cool is that the leader bonuses, like the production I'm getting from this guy as a governor, will also get the multiplier from Druidic Terraformers. So you can end up doing some pretty cool things with those leaders that have extra affinities. Like this guy who gets extra Materium, which would result in more production. You'd probably want to put him in a city that ends up making more production. As you may have seen earlier, I took the Mana Channeler's Society trait to go with my Druidic Terraformers, which means that it's easier to summon in units. They cost less mana and they're going to have an extra rank, and that allows me to really lean into the discount that you get on elementals from the Druidic Terraformers. It's 20%, and while there are some tomes that don't have elementals, things like Order and Nature don't have summon in lesser elementals. You can summon in like animals with the Nature one. There are 5 things that can benefit from that. There are the uh, Fire, Frost, Stone, Tide, and Lightning Spirits that all evolve, and each of them have a different role in the game. If we just go into the encyclopedia, we can see the units that have the lesser tag, I think would be the good way to do it. Yeah, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 different roles covered here. There's no pole arm one that's covered in Materium. There's a construct that can do that, that's summonable, and then there's archers that can all basically get elemental damage through summons. There's gargoyles that are elemental. Technically, they benefit from this tag as well. And a nice thing about elementals is you can put like Sanctuary on them, Keeper's Mark to keep them alive longer. There's also Materium has access to Wind Ragers. They get access to a second elemental in one of their tomes. Pretty good. I like the Wind Rager. Not Wager, Rager. I can spell. Yeah, this guy's like a secondary one, which has some different weaknesses, different resistances, so it kind of like fills in the role nicely. Oh, and we don't want to forget there is the Shadow Empire skill, which can reduce your magic upkeep, right? That one is pretty good in general. Yeah, another reduction of 20%. You combine that with the elemental reduction of 20%. There's only like 10 more percent you can reduce off of that upkeep. I think there's like a cap at 50%. So yeah, very good, I'd say. Spend some Imperium to increase your first hero capacity, and then always try to be at your hero cap. So this is kind of a tricky calculation to make because you want to spend Imperium on a couple of different things. One thing you want to spend it on is founding cities, that costs Imperium. Another thing you may want to spend it on is on the Empire skills, that costs Imperium. But I think the best thing you can do for clearing, for having a good, strong army, is spending some Imperium on a hero. Of course, right now I can't do that because on turn 1 I have 0 Imperium and it's going to cost me 300 Imperium to say I want to be able to support another hero cap. It used to be that if I wanted to, I could just come in here, spend some gold to go over capacity, but right now I need to increase my hero cap before I can buy a hero for 150 gold. So if I just pass a turn, we'll see what happens. We'll see that the hero capacity timer goes from 10 turns to 9 turns, and it's going to basically cost me a lot less Imperium if I just wait a few turns to get my hero capacity. I found that if I waited 6 or 7 turns, it would only cost me about 100 Imperium to get my second hero, and I found that at that point it makes a lot of sense to do that. But up until then, you're not going to have the Imperium. You're definitely not going to have the Imperium to get your hero capacity for the first few turns of the game. I think the earliest you could do it would be like maybe turn 5 or 6, because yeah, by turn 5 you should have 200 Imperium. The number will take down 30 times 5 or 4 to be under 200 Imperium, but that's going to be all of your Imperium, and it's going to really delay your ability to get a second city going, which you don't want to put off too long. You want to basically balance your ability to have a strong military now with your ability to get a strong economy to support a strong military later. That I think is the main calculation here, and that's going to be very map dependent. If you're playing on harder settings, you may need stronger army faster in order to clear out certain locations. If you're playing on a smaller map, then economy is going to be less important. You're going to have to fight your enemy a lot earlier, and then that means you're going to want basically more heroes a little bit earlier. One thing I realized after buying my first hero is that it's going to take more time to get the next hero just passively. It's going to take 15 turns instead of 10 turns, and that results in a higher cost to buying the next hero cap. As you can see, it's saying 360, and that's basically saying if I wanted to skip all 12 of those turns, it's going to cost me 360. If I wanted to skip 11 turns, I just wait a turn, and it's going to cost me 330. If I wanted to skip 3 turns, that's 30 times 3, that's 90 Imperium. So I just wait 9 turns and then spend 90 Imperium to get my next hero. That's probably closer to what I would end up doing, because getting the hero at the right time can be very, very nice, very important. And I was already going over hero cap a little bit in the way things used to work, because that would reduce Imperium a little bit. It's not that different than spending, I don't know, 50, 60, 90 Imperium on a hero. 100 might be a bit costly, but I think that getting a second hero earlier is better than getting a third hero that same amount earlier. Same as you get more and more heroes. There's like a bigger difference between going from 1 to 2 heroes than 2 to 3 heroes, and then from 3 to 4 heroes. But the other thing you might want to be spending this Imperium on is basically your cities. It's going to cost you 200 Imperium if you're just like a normal uh, society. If you have the adept settlers, then you can get it down a little bit. And then there, of course, is the really nice Materium perk. It costs 100 Imperium to make outposts cheaper to make, and it makes it so you get a work camp, allowing you to make roads very quickly, which combines nicely with the barbarians' ritual of alacrity, which allows them to get back their movement and health. Another one I really like early is this one. As you can see on the map, I was pretty close to an enemy hero. One I think I could probably attack into and win a fight against. This is not that strong. I think I have more here because I recruited my hero like relatively early. I've taken a couple good fights and gotten some good levels. They're level 2, whereas my dragon's level 5. So, I'd probably win that fight. And then there's this fight down here I could take with my stack if I wanted to try and get more knowledge off of that perk. I mean, 150 knowledge compared to 64 knowledge a turn is pretty significant. Another important thing to note here is that it's not worth spending Imperium that you have to get hero capacity if you don't have the gold in order to hire the hero. But one interesting thing you can do is you can actually integrate cities, and that will make it so that you have a free hero. I think there are certain events that do something similar to this, but I didn't have this hero in my list a second ago. I think you can see that if you go back a few seconds, and now all of a sudden I have a free hero, a zero cost hero that I can get if I have the capacity to hire them. Obviously, you need to spend the Imperium to do that if you don't have the capacity, but I like that interaction. I think it's pretty cool. Synergies and build ideas for the Glacial Mammoth subculture led by Loom-Frost. So I have to admit, this is the part of the video that I have been the most excited to research and record. So I'm having a hard time containing my excitement. When I first saw all the different possibilities for primal animals, the first thing that went through my mind was I want to make mammoth riders with the primal mammoth spirit animal that are miniature. I want to give them the smallkin enchantment, and I also wrote down I really want to do like the eagle mounts with the crows because I think that would be a fun combination thematically, but also the eagle mounts, they said something about being very good in the grass. So I was like, that sounds great. Also, can't wait to just do silly things with crocodile riders. That sounds super fun and like Voxel's favorite primal animal. At least that's what it sounded like on stream. But let's get back to the smallkin mammoth. So what I really wanted to do with this one is try that because I thought it'd be really funny to have a really small mammoth. Um, but then when I came in here to try and make my mammoth small, they only miniaturize the goats, not the mammoths themselves. So now I just have these tiny little people riding on top of these mammoths that don't have the large tag. One of the first things I actually noticed when I was playing with the mammoth riders was these guys don't have the large unit tag on them at all. They are cavalry, and I think if they were large target, then they would be they'd have to have something really good to go with like, to counteract the fact that cavalry is usually countered by the same things that counter large targets. Like I think polearms get bonus 45% damage against both of those things. And what I found really interesting about that is when you go into get mammoths through the summon animal option, which you can do actually in the Frost. That's something that we'll talk about in a second here. They actually do have the large uh, unit tag. There's one. There's the mammoth right here. If we look at him, he is in fact considered a large target. One thing I really like with the combination of the Frost Dragon and the Primal Mammoth is that you have more sources of frozen. This one is a pretty big source of frozen in an area of effect. And then we have the Conjure Primal Mammoth, which I could do like right here. It's a pretty good space to try and use his Glacial Stomp. He has this pretty awesome Charge Strike, which displaces and replaces, allowing you to potentially set up better positions for your Frost Breath. This just seems too perfect not to go for the AoE here. And I think each of them will have a 50% to be frozen. Let's just double check that. Yeah, you see all of them have the chance to be frozen in the area of effect here. So not bad at all. Get some strengthened. You can come in here and try and freeze from behind as well. That guy's immune to frozen, so there's just like a lot of synergy there. He does take damage, so I probably don't need to do the attack that way, right? Yeah, I could do it this way. But as you can see, that will make it so that the enemy has a lot less actions in general to retaliate. And also there's this nice interaction with how when Frost is resisted, they become slowed, and Frostblades do more damage against units that are slowed or frozen. So there's a lot of potential to do a lot of damage with this combination. Specifically, if you do go the route of Spawnkin, then you will have the ability to just output a lot of damage very quickly. Now that I've had more time to think about this build, I still think I would want the Tome of Cryomancy for the Frost elementals and Frost in general, given that my primal animal really likes Frost. But I think Tome of Necromancy has a lot of great spells. I really like Necrotize because that it basically allows you to get another unit on the field and you do something else on top of it. You can kill a lot of enemies with 10 frost damage and 10 blight damage, and if not, decaying means they won't be able to get healed very easily. So in general, this tome is great. It gives you access to souls, so you can start collecting them when you're killing biological units. You can specifically target certain things on the strategic map that would give you souls, and really get that part of your economy rolling earlier if you start with the Tome of Necromancy. But I also think that there is some reasons not just to go for one affinity. I think one affinity generally is easier to counter. And for that reason, I do like going for Spawnkin, and it also kind of fits neatly into the way this other new unit works, the Infernal Juggernaut, which you can't summon um, in the frost zones. I was testing it earlier, and you actually can summon it in the, I think, sand and ashland. I need to spell infernal right. Um, and it seems like it's closest, in my opinion, to the mammoth primal animal, but it has that fire like bit to it. So I think mixing like fire and ice can be pretty interesting in a build. And you can probably do that maybe with something that summons in animals or allows you to use fight to power to get some fiend units, because this guy has the fiend tag, and that means fight to power allows them to, forget where the fiend tag is exactly in here. There he is. That means like the fight to power from one of the chaos tomes can allow you to turn like even demonkin units like tier 3 racial units, maybe like bastions, or you could turn scalds into these guys using fight to power. I think that's a strategy I heard about being very popular for getting towards Balors. You turn them into Chaos Eaters, then into Balors using fight to power. But there's also some other interesting things you can do with the animal tome. So you could go for the animal tome pretty easily with this build and summon in a lot of pretty cool things. I think you get some of the best animals in the Arctic zone. I was able to get an ice spider. Pretty sure the white wolf and the dire bear were in the game beforehand, but as you saw earlier, we got this tier 3 mammoth, which is different than the tier 2 elephant. I think they're similar but different. The tier 3 mammoth, I believe, only appears in the cold. That makes sense thematically. I was able to get some of these Thunderbirds, which are amazing units. Being able to hit people from range is one of my favorite things to do. Um, which is something we'll see more with the crow, as we talked about earlier. They're pretty interesting, and they kind of remind me of the Syndicate Sentinels, because one, they do lightning damage like the Syndicate Sentinels, and two, they can sit really far back, and three, they can do an AoE kind of like these guys can as well. But I guess the other thing that they have in common with Syndicate Sentinels that the Thunderbirds don't have is that the Syndicate Sentinel was a summon, just like the Primal Crow is a summon. Synergies and build ideas for the Stormcrow subculture led by High-Squall. So I have to say, I really like the way this primal animal works when you compare him to the way all the others do in general, because he has a ranged attack and all the other ones are um, melee focused. If we look through the others, this guy has a melee strike, melee strike. We have a melee strike here, a charge strike, which is a bit different with a glacial stomp, which we just looked at in the previous thing. We have another melee strike, and this one has a pounce on top of the regular melee strike. So as you can see here, most of these guys are just like traditional melee attackers, whereas the crow, they're kind of designed to stay a little bit further back and just deal damage to enemies that are clumped up. They have this nice big AoE, which will punish enemies for standing near each other, specifically if they are weak to lightning damage. If they have some lightning resistance, then this probably isn't that big of a deal. If they have like the storm spirits, they may be able to get close to your mythical crow or your primal crow, which is a mythical unit, to keep them from doing a lot of damage. But that means they're using actions on a summon instead of your main forces, which is generally pretty good for the person who made the summon. Another interesting thing to note here is that the Primal Crow has no weaknesses. They only have 3 armor and 1 resistance, 70 HP, which is less HP than this unit and less defensive stats, but it also is not weak to the lightning damage. Like this guy's weak to lightning, this guy's weak to lightning. Most of them have a little bit of extra resistance to an affinity, except for the Serpent. but the Crow is just across the board neutral when it comes to taking damage. It has 40 movement. Some of these guys have more movement than that, but that's all you really need with a ranged unit because they should be able to sit pretty far back and actually hit units from far away. One thing that I was very concerned about when I first saw this was that people might entirely avoid accuracy by just targeting the ground, but it seems like the devs took that into consideration, which we can see a little bit of in this combat. If I wanted to try and target the ground with an AoE, you could typically do that like this with Alt and press right click, but because there's no center unit to target there, they're not letting me target the ground. You can actually use obstacles to target. If I press Alt and I right click this, for example, I don't have to deal with accuracy. That unit will just take 9 damage. But if that was an enemy standing next to an enemy, then I would have accuracy on that unit that I'd have to deal with. It's kind of interesting the way that works. And with the way scattering um, or the way the mist shots and gray shots work in Age of Wonders 4, because it is different than Age of Wonders Planetfall. In Planetfall, your shots could scatter, your grenades could scatter so that they would still hit the center hex. If you don't hit your accuracy pass, then you end up getting an outright miss. And if you graze, it's just like a normal graze. It's does 50% damage, so it's not too bad. I think, yeah, when I tested this earlier, somehow they hit the first shot, I think destroyed the obstacle, and then had 65% chance to hit the other two. We could take a look at the combat history to just double check that. But yeah, they needed 35 to hit, and they rolled 71. They rolled 57, and they rolled an 85. Um, they needed a 75 on this one and a 30 on this one. So yeah, this, I think the second hit destroyed the obstacle. So I just rolled really well here. I think if I reloaded this, we'd see slightly different results. All right, I just restarted that turn to basically show what happens when you miss your shots and graze your shots. One of these guys should miss. There we go. You can miss. And another option is, of course, grazing. One of these should hopefully be a graze. There you go, which is half damage. Pretty interesting that that skill interacts that way with these other things. I like that you can destroy obstacles, or you can get rid of the things that obscure units to make it easier to hit your shots from your other crows. I think having a lot of crows can make it very easy to deal with enemies from far away. So I think this has a pretty fun place in certain builds, but it could be countered relatively easily by people who bring things with a lot of lightning resistance. There's some things that give you lightning resistance, and if they see you just going for lightning damage, um, you might get countered pretty soon. Before we move on, I did want to point out that the Mistling does counter the Crow pretty heavily because of the way accuracy works. You can just hide in mist and evade a lot of your attacks, or try to evade a lot of your attacks. You still might graze, but it seems like a unit that would be kind of tricky to deal with. And I also wanted to mention what I got when I did the like summon animal and then summon greater animal. I think it's summon animal and summon greater animal for these. And I didn't see very much new stuff in here. I did see that you can't get the Sabertooth in grasslands, or I think it's fertile plains when you're looking on at the hexes themselves. It's confusing because I think they don't call it fertile plains up here, but it's referring to the same type of thing basically. Synergies and build ideas for the Ash Sabertooth subculture led by Fell-Fang. So I have to admit, this is one that I've thought less about, but I found it really interesting when I went to test the greater summon animals for the Ashlands and the Serpents, because I found both of them were making this new Infernal Juggernaut at a relatively decent rate. I found that I got 2 out of 12 when I did the greater summon 12 times in this setting. I think I got a lot more when I was in the Sands, and I'm not sure if there's any difference between Ashland and Sands. I would imagine they're the same because I think that's how it used to be before, the Wolf update and Primal Fury. But it could be that they're slightly different because things like um, Druidic Terraformers, they treat Ashlands differently than than they do sands. I think Ashlands was gold and um, Sands was, I forget exactly which one, but it wasn't, I don't think it was in the same category as the other ones. But what I really like about the summons you're getting here is a lot of them do fire damage and physical damage, and that reminds me a lot of Chaos. So I think if you're playing this build, you probably are going Pyromancy, and you're probably going with fire, or something like a fire dragon would make a lot of sense here. This build I didn't make a fire dragon because I was thinking if you're going to be summoning in a lot of units, you probably want to go with this build combination. If you're going to be summoning in a lot of animals, you may want gifted casters, and maybe mana channelers to just summon in units a little bit quicker, and that could be better on a Wizard King. Maybe not, but I think a Dragon with Fire Breath could be really cool because you could stack a lot of fire damage or burning on units, and I believe now you can stack things like poison and burning so that you deal a lot of damage over time. So I believe this could be pretty fun. There's also the chance to throw in, think flame burst weapons applies to these guys. So you get extra crit chance, and then when you kill something, you get to deal 20 more damage to the adjacent enemies. I think this is just like a very good alpha strike build because of the way the primal animal that goes with this works in general too. Because doesn't he have a pounce strike that lets him just go further forward and do a lot of stuff? Usually units that have things like that are in a lot of danger too, but with the Sabertooth, they can probably get summoned and thrown away more, um, without less concern because it's just a summon. So yeah, that's a pretty good ability because it leaves you with an action, and you deal damage to enemy units up to 2 hexes away. So that's quite a bit of burst of AoE damage essentially. It's kind of like the crow that we talked about. It's kind of like the mammoth that we've already talked about. So there is some like neat little overlap with like jumping damage and just like doing a lot with your alpha strikes in the primal cultures and the builds that I've seen so far. Another thing about the Sabertooth is it can probably tank a little bit better than say the Crow because it's melee focused, and that if you combine that with Pyromancy, if that's like your first tome, then you're gonna have elementals that need some protection. They're all about their range damage, so they need something else to go for their forward and keep the enemy busy. But once again, that would be another source of burning, so generally pretty good. Another thing I noticed in the Ashlands when I was summoning things is I got one of my favorite units. The Scrap Hermit was introduced in the last DLC, Empires and Ashes, and it's quite a tanky tier 2 unit in general. So I think spawning in the Ashlands makes it makes sense that this unit spawns more often in the Ashlands than other places because that's like where a lot of things are left over from catastrophes, some scrap metal for the hermits to go live in, right? Wild Speakers work particularly well with the Sabertooth because of the way action points work. I think giving the Unleash the Beast to a Mammoth is amazing, and giving it to a Crow is really good. But keep in mind that if one of your Mammoths isn't able to get next to an enemy, if somehow your enemy is able to run away from your summon, then all of a sudden a a mammoth with no strengthened is just as useful as a mammoth with the strengthened. Whereas it's easier to get a crow into position, and it's easier to get this guy into position with its pounce strike. I really like the fact that you can summon in like from anywhere using the conjure thing, and then you can like kill a unit pretty easily like this. I like how he's not facing that way. And then look, he's got an action point back, which he can use to, you guessed it, jump on this guy, leaving him with once again another action point. So that's quite efficient. Synergies and build ideas for the Dune Serpent subculture led by Earth-Coil. When I first started thinking about this build, I wasn't really sure where to go with it because I saw that the Animist was able to do physical damage instead of magical damage, and then I saw that the Serpent can blind people. All of your guys can actually blind people once they get up to their their boon, which will make it so that the accuracy from physical ranged and magic attacks is lower, basically forcing people to come to you and deal with you at melee range. So you're probably going to want things that are good at melee and maybe have extra retaliations. And the fact that it takes away a retaliation from the enemy is not nothing either. But when I saw that you could summon in a lot of infernal juggernauts and phoenixes from these sand tiles, I started thinking this seems like a build that really wants you to focus on animals and building up animals. Animals mostly deal physical damage, but this guy actually has access to magical damage through animals in the form of the Infernal Juggernaut and the Phoenix, and I think some of the other ones like the Nightmare, the Fire Wyvern. A lot of these guys have a mixed damage channel. The Elephant doesn't. That's just like a normal summon animal, and the Scrap Hermit has access to two different damage types, including a magic type blight, which is it means that you might have some versatility with the Serpent. I also noticed that this is the one that gives you, I think, some extra Materium, right? Which means that the Serpent is going to have access to some of the other tools that Materium players would typically have. It's a nice mix of nature and Materium, which is a playstyle I always enjoyed. Another fun thing you can do with this build is you can play a Materium Dragon and take Gilding Breath, which I think is really fun because it makes sense that a serpent, a reptile, would have a dragon, another reptile kind of following it. And I think a fun way to take that build would be to take the new Naga form. I think it's in the new Astral Tome, the Stormborn one. The Stormborn gives you um, is it the Naga form right there, which turns your guys into basically reptiles with no legs or ability to use mounts. I also noticed that this faction will benefit less from Hideous Stench, which reduces resistance and makes it easier to apply status effects. The blind, I think, just happens on attacks, and since you have less like innate magical damage, the less resistance is going to be less useful for this faction in general. And things like Sundered Defense through, I don't know, Glade Runners, or I think there is a tome that gives you Sundered Defense, a tier 1 tome. Those things are going to be more valuable when you're playing as the Serpent. Synergies and build ideas for the Mire Crocodile subculture led by Deep-Maw. This combination is inspired by what Avoxel was saying about his favorite combination on stream. He really likes using Hideous Stench with, I think, Poisonous and the Dragon Breath that does Poisonous as well. Yeah, if you take the Dragon Star, you can get Dragon Breath here that does a 60% chance to poison, kind of like the frozen thing that I showed off at the beginning of this video. And that combines really nicely with the ability that the units get when they get 5 stacks. They can inflict diseased, which will make it so that the poison deals a lot more damage, specifically if you've got a lot of stacks on a unit. You can do almost like entire units HP in one turn. If you've got, I think, 5 stacks of poison, that's like 8 damage. If they've got no normal resistance, that's -8 resistance. That's going to be a lot of damage on them every turn for a few turns, I think. The other neat thing about this combination is that you can use slithers. If you wanted to, you could make your first tome the Tome of Evolution to try and get access to the ability to poison units through this unit as well. I think that would be a very strong combination right out of the gate. You're going to have the ability to clear out most like normal fights very quickly, very easily. There are, of course, units that are immune to diseased, and you'll probably want to avoid those stacks until you're a little bit stronger. This one, for example, might not be too bad, but they are immune to poison, so you won't be able to rely on that effect to clear out those units. You'll probably have to use like regular normal attacks, like the melee attack here, or maybe a melee attack from one of your other units, like the Protector. The Crocodile himself is actually pretty cool because every attack they get they get to do more damage for the rest of that round. So it's very optimal to try and summon them next to a unit, get 3 attacks, and then if that unit is still alive the next turn, attack them again because you're going to get increasing damage for not moving and attacking from where you started, essentially. Right. So this does diseased, and you combine that with the poisoned, and it's going to be a lot of damage from magic, essentially. So I think just like with the Serpent build, it makes a lot of sense to use Naga forms if you're going to be using the new Primal Crocodile build because, well, thematically it makes a lot of sense. It's another reptile. This one just has legs essentially. But also I think that Naga forms are very powerful. I mentioned earlier that I think Slip Away is just super good, but getting this through an enchantment means that you don't need to try and get Slip Away boots, and Slip Away boots aren't always accessible. That's something that requires very specific magic materials in order to get up and running. So I think getting this through an enchantment is pretty valuable. Another thing we haven't talked about that much is the different animals that you're going to get access to in Primal Fury. We have this baseline crocodile, which is a tier 1 unit. I think you can summon through the summon animal in the swamp territory, but when I went and I tested it, I actually wasn't able to get him to appear. This guy also has thrashing. He's low maintenance. He's generally pretty straightforward. But yeah, if we look here, I did the greater animal summon a few times here, there, and then the lesser one didn't show up a single crocodile when I went through that summon list, but it's kind of random. I'm fairly certain it would appear in the swamps. That was what would make the most sense to me thematically. We haven't talked about the Sabertooth, but it works like the primal one where it has this pounce ability. It's got a melee strike. Everything else I think is pretty straightforward about it. I think Skirmisher, yeah, it gives them swift and slippery, which you can see down here. The elephant is another new unit. It has a charge strike, which displaces and replaces. But what I really like is this stomp that has a 60% chance to stun. It does 32 damage and is very similar to what the tier 3 Mammoth can do. It just, I think, does essentially a little bit less damage. And I believe that one does have the large target tag, unlike the elephant. But yeah, let's go down to him. It's a tier 3. All these primal animals are like um, the things you get from the primal culture. The mammoth right here has a stomp that has a slightly higher chance to stun, slightly more damage, and I believe, yeah, he has the large target tag as well. So that's cool. That this guy works slightly different than the element. It's like a slightly bigger version of the elephant, does slightly more damage, and yeah, has the other tags. We have the pestilence crocodile, which I'm not entirely sure how you get access to this guy, but he's pretty cool. He's pretty cool. He's like, I think, an undead animal, right? Yeah, he's undead, a large target. It may come from one of the story realms. That would make a lot of sense. I haven't played through them yet, but yeah, the pestilent crocodile is pretty good. We just looked at the Sabertooth. We have the infernal juggernaut, and that's the entire list of new animals. Synergies and build ideas for the Sylvan wolf subculture led by Oathmother. Out of all the builds, this is one of the ones that I'm least excited by. I find that the way the Primal Wolf's main attack works makes it so that you want to basically go for Pack Hunter, which you can get through a new body trait that's just Pack Hunter all by itself, or you can take the Wolf Mounts, which gives you a little bit of extra stuff on top of that. Like, I think you get a little bit more health and another attack for your mounted units, which can be very dangerous for your ranged units. I think usually your archers, your tier 2 archers or tier 1 archers, would get this on top of their normal attacks, meaning they would actually run into melee range and get attacked a lot by guys. They can't attack properly on the next turn because they're pinned and this is on cooldown for 2 turns. So in general, this is kind of like a really risky pick, but if you're able to manually fight every fight, I think a lot of people who play by email multiplayer, they use this build to try and get access to another way to deal a lot of damage, because that's not nothing. Getting access to another damage channel that does AoE that applies weakened is pretty significant, specifically if you're playing like the dark culture. But yeah, I decided that since these guys are probably going to be getting really close to the enemy, it might be good to give them the ability to consume flora, which is a free action, and the ability to consume corpses, which is another free action to give them healing, just in case they get a little bit too close. I also want to make sure that I had Animist, so I took the thing that gave me another Animist. And yeah, as you can see, these guys are mounted, and they have this other um, ability. They have the Enfeebling Howl, which means that they may get a little bit closer to the enemy than they need to, but they should be able to heal each other and just take care of that damage if they do accidentally get a little bit too close. One of the more interesting things about this primal culture subculture is that the favored terrain gives you draft, and that means that this subculture should be able to pump out units relatively fast. Of course, you won't be able to get any benefits on your outposts from favored terrain. There's no way to build units in those outposts, so you're just going to want to basically take advantage of this around your cities. You're going to want to set up your cities in places that are in woods or have the ability to terraform into woods using like the temple, and then you're going to be able to use, I think, the adjacency bonus from this special province improvement that can be very powerful relatively early in the game too. So you're going to be able to build things like, I don't know, chaplains, which seem like a pretty good early unit that you can research. They heal and will also be able to consume flora, eat corpse, and do some spirit damage on top of your other units that are already doing spirit damage. So it just kind of fits neatly into that. But what I really like is the bless, the ability to make it so that your units have more fortune, strengthened, and bolstered resistance will really help your primal animal do a lot of damage, but also any other animals. So in general, I think the chaplain will fit really neatly into getting a very strong alpha strike, as well as just like doing what the other guys in the armies are already pretty good at, which is healing. Um, we also have a nice new unit, or not new unit, a nice change to the Lightbringer. The Lightbringer is now a lot more likely to convert units. If we just look him up here, he has a 90% chance to make a hero or non-hero unit dominated, which means if both this unit and that unit are alive at the end of the combat, you can spend mana to keep them permanently. This isn't something that times out. I think there are different things that give you mind control, and it might be like Seduce only lasts 3 turns. Dominated is very good, and they also change the effect, so when it fails, you do 15 spirit damage. So I'm probably going to be getting things like the Lightbringers quite a bit in my upcoming games. The other nice thing about being able to do a lot of spirit damage from the Lightbringers, the Chaplains, your Animists, and the Spirit Wolf is that Necromancy looks really good in the Wolf update. They've changed a lot of things to make that seem pretty optimal. And by having spirit damage, you should be able to kill them more easily. A lot of the undeads have things like weakness to spirit damage. If you're playing the Sylvan Wolf, you'll probably want to play a champion so that you can get more draft out of the good draft production you already have. But if you're playing the Lightbringer build that I was just mentioning, you're probably going to need a little bit more mana. So I think there is a argument for taking the Wizard King to go with this start. But I don't think I would actually take dragons with this because there's just too much potential to get other units with this build, and I would want to try and use that to my advantage. Another interesting thing to note here is that when I went to summon in my animals in the woods, I noticed that you could get a crocodile in the woods, an elephant in the woods, and then I noticed some really, really interesting stuff when I summoned in my graders. I'm not sure if this is um, going to be what you see when you try to summon in greater animals for the Sylvan Wolf in the woods, but I was seeing a lot of frost wyverns, which are the best wyvern. I got 5 of them. I saw an ice matriarch and a mammoth. So it could be that the forests work a little bit like the Arctic. I don't believe this should have the Arctic tag on this, or the snow tag that leads to it being those types of units. But yeah, keep that stuff in mind. Synergies and build ideas for the tunneling spider subculture, which is led by Under-Atter. This subculture appears to be one of the stronger subcultures because it gives you access to extra knowledge through its favored terrain. We were seeing some pretty big numbers in the dev streams, and they've already changed it from +3 knowledge down to +2 knowledge, and I could easily see this changing to +1 knowledge and still being a very popular pick because not only do you get the knowledge, you get the fact that you start underground with the excavation trait, which is kind of like a free 100 Imperium. If we click here, you'll see I don't have to spend 100 Imperium on the excavation. I just have that, so that's great. And then I'm probably a little bit more isolated, which could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. It could be that I'm right on top of another person, and that's going to be make it hard for my cities to develop. One interesting thing about the underground is if you take Hermit Kingdom, it can be a little bit more easy to keep your cities away from other cities. But right here, the passageway that goes up above ground, that's right on the city. So immediately as I took that space, I was canceling out my own Hermit Kingdom bonus. But one of the really neat changes that they have added with the Wolf update is the ability to say, you know what, I don't like this sector, burn it down. I'm not going to be able to use that, get rid of this, and that's awesome because beforehand you were just kind of stuck with your decision. There was no like undo button. It takes 3 turns to burn the thing down, so it's not something you can rely on too much, but it is nice to have that option available to you. The tunneling megalith is something else that can give you a lot of knowledge. This one gives you knowledge for each thing that's surrounding it, each of the favorite terrains that's surrounding it. So right here it's got I think one, two, three. Not a bad general boost, but it just gets taken out of control once you add on the fact that the Hermit Kingdom can boost this number up quite a lot. I think I just built one of the knowledge buildings in here, and the other thing is the tunneling megalith right there. So let's just pass the turn and see what this number jumps up to once I get away from the independent city on the other thing. All of a sudden I'm up to that much knowledge. That's quite a big increase, and I think yeah, you can do some silly things with it. I think if you're going to go for a knowledge heavy build, it makes sense to get a lot of society traits that benefit that strategy. So what I did is I decided to pair Ancient Wise Ones with the Hermit Kingdom, making it so every time I get a new tome, it's a little bit easier to get one of the things out of the tomes. You can also do, I think, Runesmiths is a pretty good option, and maybe Great Builders could work decently well. But yeah, there's also one more thing up here that makes sense. You could try and get the thing that gives you more knowledge from heroes defeated in combat. That's a pretty good return on Imperium spent, but there's other things you may want to spend your Imperium on. One interesting thing you can do with the tunneling spider is actually something we saw in one of the dev streams. If you give lifesteal to the mistling, that unit is going to be very hard to deal with because it's going to be hard to hit using the trail the mists, and when it does get hit, it's going to have a pretty efficient lifesteal. The lifesteal will take more temporary hit points or give you back more temporary hit points when you use a single action attack, and the Mistling only has single action attacks. It has the Misty Strike and it has the Fey Trick, both allowed to do a lot of really interesting stuff, like applying a random negative status effect or move really far away from units that may or may not have been able to get right up in your face, get adjacent to you. And I think that allows you to avoid things like retaliation. In general, I think this is the best primal animal communion you can get for the Mistling. There are other things that inflict blind and like diseased and that type of stuff. I think being able to get lifesteal 2 or 3 turns after you started attacking, which is generally how Rising Fury will work with the Tunneling Spider, will allow this unit to stay on the board a lot longer, and it will just generally be very efficient. And I think that's pretty much everything I had for you in this video. If there's anything that you wanted to add, if there's any strong synergies that you wanted to recommend to people, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I am planning on streaming the new content shortly after this video is posted, so if you're watching this video soon after it came out, please feel free to stop by the stream and hang out. I'll see you around. Have a good one.